Thank you, worship team. Church, you may have a seat. That was fantastic. I got goosebumps. Thank you, worship team, for leading us this morning. Good morning, church. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And let me just start by saying that we need to set some historical context today. So we're gonna go back. Anybody that has met me before knows that I am a history person. And so we're going to talk just a little bit of history today. And so what you should know is that in 1794, Congress realized that it needed to start protecting ships along the eastern seaboard of North Carolina. And so what it did is it authorized the construction of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. So construction began then in 1794, and it was first lit with whale oil in 1803. And the original structure was 90 feet tall, and it was used to help signal ships passing through this treacherous stretch of the coastline. There you can see it along the sides. The message of the lighthouse is simple, isn't it? Be aware or face grave danger. Be aware or face grave danger. And as all things go, soon that lighthouse wasn't big enough. So, thanks to advances in technology like what we have going on here, the lighthouse grew taller. And by 1853, they authorized the additional building of 60 more feet on top of the lighthouse, making it just over 150 feet tall. And today, if you were to go visit the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, you will see a lighthouse that is just over 193 feet tall. And this lighthouse serves as a beacon to all of those passing ships, letting them know the dangers that are ahead along the coastline. And so what it does is it aids in providing safe passages through the rocks and the reefs that are located in the area. In fact, the official website for the lighthouse reads this. It says, the current forces southbound ships into a dangerous 12-mile-long sandbar called the Diamond Shoals. Hundreds and possibly thousands of shipwrecks have occurred in this area and given it the reputation as the graveyard of the Atlantic. So we need a lighthouse to point us to the truth so we can navigate the treacherous waters around us. Well, that fixed local point is meant to guide people safely to harbor, and we might say that truth helps to work and illuminate our path in life as well. That the dangers that we face in this world sometimes seem to be lurking just below the surface of the water. And so I don't think it's any surprise then that throughout our history as humans, we have sought to do something very similar to lighthouses. That from a fixed point, we want a light or a guide that will help us and others find truth. The problem, as we're going to see in today's text, is that if we first don't know the truth, then anything that we build up on that is going to be built on false pretenses. And that leads us and others astray. Well, if we haven't met before, my name is Justin, and I want to lead us this morning into Daniel chapter 3. Now, when Chris introduced this passage to the book of Daniel to us a number of weeks ago, he said there's lots of great stories and there's lots of great theology, and we focus on two of them, right? We focus on Daniel in the lion's den, and we focus on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And there's lots to pull from the book of Daniel, but we seem to focus on those two. And so Pastor Chris has been leading us through the book of Daniel. Well, today we get one of those two famous stories. So Daniel chapter 3 is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Though as we get started, I do want to make one clarification, and that is that I am going to do my best outside of when I'm reading the scripture When I'm talking about those three individuals, I am going to do my best to not use the names Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because I think that does a disservice to these amazing people of faith. You see, the names Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the kind of famous names that we have given them, are really three Hebrew slaves named Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, as we see them listed in Daniel chapter 1. And so these three individuals have been taken captive from Jerusalem, placed in Babylon, and they are now working for King Nebuchadnezzar, and it is the king who renames them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But here is why that matters, and why I think we miss something in the story if we don't understand what's going on here. The names that were given to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were the names given to them in the name of the king's service, and they are named now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, pointing to the Babylonian gods. So they are now named after gods like Marduk and Baal and Aku. King Nebuchadnezzar, whom they serve, was paying homage to his gods, believing that it was his name that was great and his gods that should be praised. But we need to contrast that with what's going on behind the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The name Shadrach speaks to the strength of the Babylonian god Marduk, while Hananiah, his Hebrew name, means Yahweh is gracious. Meshach means who can be what Aku is, another reference to one of his gods, while Meshach, the Hebrew name, means one who is like God. And Abednego, the third man in this story, means servant of the god Nabu, while Azariah, his Hebrew name, means Yahweh has helped me. So you can see that even in the names of these stories and in the names of the individuals, something is going to be at stake. Who will reign supreme? The many gods of Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar, or the one true God of the Hebrew exiles? And we have to understand that as these names play out in the story, they're telling us something not just about the character of the men, but the character of the gods in the story. And so I am going to use the names Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah whenever I'm referring to them, though I have left Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the text as we find it. So with that, let's read now the beginning of Daniel chapter 3. And what we're going to do is dive into that story, understand it a bit, and then explain some of those consequences for us. So here we go, Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, many of us probably don't know how big 60 cubits is, but my opening story has given you a reference point. It's 90 feet tall. King Nebuchadnezzar starts this story by building a lighthouse-sized statue to honor himself and his own greatness. That's the setting. Verse 2. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not bow down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So here we have the showdown. The stage is set. King Nebuchadnezzar has built a lighthouse-sized statue made of gold to honor himself, and then summoned all of the royal's officials to pay homage to it and to say, "Yes, King, oh, you're great, King, how mighty you are, King," and order the rest of the people to follow suit. So they made this pronouncement from all over that people should come to Babylon and pay homage to King Nebuchadnezzar and his might. And then we see there in verse 6 that we might sum up the pronouncement this way: you should bow to the statue or you can burn. Church, I'm here to tell you that the tactics may have changed throughout the centuries, but that is still a message that we face today constantly. We are bombarded with messages from the media and government, from education, from political action committees and social media influencers, from tech giants, and even our well-intentioned neighbor. And they give us messages that say things like, you need to look like me, think like me, act like me, and accept my behavior, or you will get to face my wrath. Bow to the image that I have made to honor myself, or experience my fury. Verse 7. Therefore, as soon as they, that is, the people in this story, heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship this image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship it will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." And that is the danger facing Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. King Nebuchadnezzar built a lighthouse to himself, and his royal officials came home and came forward to him to snitch on the faithful Jewish people. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are named in person. And then those royal officials go so far as to say, they pay no attention to you, king. They don't serve you or your gods. Their complaint is that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are not living up to their new names, to their Babylonian names, to their captivity names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The complaint from the royal officials is that the Jewish people are living a faith that is contrary to the popular culture around them. And church, that is the complaint that the world has, or at least it should have, of us. Peter Rollins, an author a number of years ago, shared a parable about a man facing trial for his faith. In the story, being a Christian had become illegal, and so the prosecuting attorney presented as his evidence the man's well-worn Bible and the theological books in his library and the poems that this man had expressed his love for God, and even a few of the sermons that the man had preached at his local church. And at the conclusion of the trial, the man sat nervously waiting for the verdict. And after a short deliberation, the judge pronounced the man not guilty. Unbelievably, in this story, the man had been set free, which actually rather upset him. And so he confronted the judge. "What do you mean I've been found not guilty? Look at the Bible and the theological books and the poems. Look at the sermons that I've preached." And the judge rather calmly responded, "It's not the physical evidence that he was looking for. The well-worn Bible simply means that the man can read. Poetry is often full of flowery and unimpressive language that we don't take literally in the real world. Theological books could just mean that he has an interest in something, like you might have an interest in cooking. None of those things," the judge reminds the man, "are illegal. It is only the act of being a Christian." And there was no evidence for that. I first read that story more than a decade ago, and it continues to stick with me because I think there are profound implications for my life. If Christianity were to become illegal, is there enough visible evidence in the shaping of my life to convince others around me that I am guilty? Not that I have preached, not that I have read books, not that I have spent time flipping through the pages of the Bible, but have I actually been transformed by the message that the life that I live publicly in front of other people is somehow different than the culture that I am surrounded in? That is why I'm thankful for stories like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, because they are very quickly found guilty. So let's continue in verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? So now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, then very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God can save you from my hand?" Now your names are going to matter. Are you going to go with the names that I have given you, with the identities and the labels that culture wants to assign to you? Are you going to live in this falsehood that the world tries to project as truth? Or do you think that there's something beyond this that you're going to stand firm in? Verse 13 tells us that Nebuchadnezzar was furious with rage. He was doubly angry. He was literally shaking with anger. He was hot with rage. The response to his authority as king was so great, he had both an emotional response to it and a physical response. There's not just internal anger, it was externally expressed at them. Imagine standing before the most powerful person on earth, the unquestioned ruler of the largest superpower the world has ever seen, and angering them so much that you can see his flesh turn red, his voice rise in pitch, his fists clench, and that little bead of sweat begin to trickle down his forehead. That is the situation that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah find themselves in. The king begins to question them and then demand loyal obedience. Don't follow the way of that God, follow my image. Because they are, after all, they have been renamed by the greatness of his God. So now his gods are being questioned in the story. He wants to see them bow their physical bodies because he is fearful that they are not living up to the names that he is trying to give them. Which is precisely the point and the tensions that we as believers need to live in. You see, the world has tried to brand Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah and force them to look and to act and to think a certain way. The political and the religious system is coming full force at these three individuals, at Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and it is trying to force their compliance. And they are faced with that question: bow or burn? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God that we serve is able to save us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Oh, the guts they have. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the intestinal fortitude that they are carrying to confront the king and his falsehood. They stand before the king unafraid of the outcome. No, I can't guarantee my safety. I can't guarantee that I'm going to continue. Yes, I can acknowledge that my future is unknown. But what I do know in the midst of this circumstance is that there is a God so big enough, so grand enough, so loving enough, and so worth following, King, that if you are going to force me to choose between bowing and burning, there really isn't a choice. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah let King Nebuchadnezzar know that even if they perish, it's not because he is right and his gods reign supreme. No, if they perish, it's because the God that they serve, the God Yahweh, their God, the one true God, the one who reigns over heaven and earth, has allowed it to happen. And they let the king know there is nothing that he can do to dissuade that choice. They will face their impending death with their hope fixed firmly on the God they serve. Live or die, there is no place that they would rather be than in the will of God, living up to their true names, their real identity that has been given to them at birth. Verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. This is now the third time we have heard of the king's anger. And each time has interestingly been a different Hebrew word. The first was that emotional response. Internally, he was angry and upset that someone defied him. The second was that physical response. His flesh began to change. He clenched his fist. He got that bead of sweat. This one speaks literally to him becoming consecrated to anger. In his heart, the king made the sacred commitment to be angry. His sole purpose in life at that moment was to be as angry as he could. And it reminds me of that scene like in Star Wars where the Emperor is talking with Anakin, right? And he's urging him to go to the dark side, right? King Nebuchadnezzar in that moment has just let his whole being succumb to anger. Yes, let that hatred fuel you, right? Like he's standing in that moment. And as much as humanly possible, he is trying to become as angry as he can. I wrote that. And then I left the house, and somebody cut me off. And let me tell you, I can build some idols to myself very, very quickly. And in that moment, consecrated myself to anger. It happens. Verse 19, let's read it again and then continue. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. With the king's attitude changed, and he acting fully consumed in his hatred, the king orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Now, remember that they are gathered at a 90-foot gold statue of the king, celebrating him as the lighthouse to his people. The furnace that was used there would have been the one used to smelt the gold to make the idol. And thanks to my good friend Google, I can tell you that gold melts at just over 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. So Nebuchadnezzar orders it to be heated 7 times hotter. Now, I don't think this is a literal pronouncement, but an exaggeration of how angry he was. We've already seen 3 different words for the king's anger, and this is just that sort of hyperbole exclamation of it. The king's anger is consuming everything. He wants it heated as hot as he is mad. That's the pronouncement. And then on top of that, he finds the biggest, strongest, baddest dudes he can and orders that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah be bound up as tight as they can make them. It makes me think of those big burly dudes that like stand outside as like bouncers, right? Like it's those dudes. They're approaching you, and they're wrapping that cord around you. They're gonna pull it tight. It's going to hurt. Those guys that you look at and you're like, I probably shouldn't mess with him. Like there's now like a whole host of those guys descending on you, tying you up, and getting you ready to face the furnace. And as they are bound and prepared to enter the furnace and the flames, it gets heated so hot, so quickly that the furnace starts to leak flames, and it burns the individuals who had just bound up Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. See, rather than gradually heating it up so that the furnace could adapt and warm up and not crack, they just dumped some gasoline on it and lit the match. And the flames reach so far out of the furnace that it catches those bouncers on fire. The guys that just obeyed the king's orders, the ones who were faithful to this false pretense, end up being burned by it. And again, I think that's often how the world's anger seeks to work. When we get angry about the wrong things, the unholy things, the self-inflating things, other people around us become the victims. When we make our own self-made images, often end up catching other people in the fiery furnace. And we're all too willing, when we're angry, to sacrifice other people in the name of our anger, because then it makes me feel just a bit better. Which is, of course, in stark contrast to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, whose real names speak to the unwavering, faithful, ever-present help of a God who loves them. And they stand unaffected. More than that, they are willing to succumb to the flames, the falsehoods of this world, both literal and figurative, of the king's wrath. But it's in that moment that this story, that we experience the full, unwavering, faithful, ever-present help of a God who takes a dramatic turn. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and thrown into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbounded and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here." Nebuchadnezzar just made this proclamation, I ain't doing the right thing, right? He realizes this shift in his anger. His falsehoods are being called out, and he recognizes the one true Most High God. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. To the king's amazement, literally the text says his wonder and amazement, he notices a 4th person in the fire with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. His burning rage is gone. Instead, it is replaced with awe and wonder because he is witnessing a miracle. His fury is replaced with amazement as he gets to see the holiness of God on display in front of him. The presence of the 4th person is even so bright and so radiant, it outshines the fire that they are standing in. And Nebuchadnezzar then orders Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to leave the fire, to walk out, and to explain themselves. And they emerge unharmed, unsinged, a living testament to the unwavering, faithful, ever-present help of God. The content of their character melted the king's burning anger. Listen again to the king's response. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own." The faith that they had transformed the king's heart. Anger became awe in the presence of Jesus. Frustration became faith. Wrath became worship. Nebuchadnezzar even acknowledged that there is no other God on earth that can save the way that their God does. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that his gods are powerless in the face of the true God. The lighthouse that Nebuchadnezzar built to himself is not, in fact, built on truth. His 90-foot statue cannot help save anyone. The lighthouse that he built is worthless. But the God that saves, the God that stands in the fire with us, the God that protects and loves and is there with us in those hard moments, he is the lighthouse that truth is built on. He is the solid rock that delivers and saves his people from harm. Church, not much has changed in the 2,500 years since that story. The world still insists on building statues and monuments that honor itself. The world is still bent on building lighthouses that are of little substance or real value against the treacherous waters of life. The world's political systems still exert power that force people of faith into a reckoning. Will you bow or will you burn? And yet, church, we can take heart that in the same span of 2,500 years, our God has not changed either. The God who was present in the flames with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah is present with us. The same God who was unwavering, faithful, and ever present is still unwavering, faithful, and ever present. Which means that the outcome will be the same. When we, rooted in faithfulness and knowledge, experience that transformation, we get to serve as a living testament and testimony to God's goodness. And we get to point to a Savior who can transform that same anger into awe, that same frustration into faith, and that same wrath into worship. And so, church, when we have experienced God's goodness, our life should point to that same level of transformation that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah experienced. That's true hope. That's true restoration. The world's answers lead only to more anger and to more wrath. It is only the God that we worship that can set captives free and that can walk through the fire with us. Everything else is just the world's anger that is going to burn up and consume and never leave anybody satisfied. But when we stand firm in faith, when we acknowledge the work that God has done in us and we share that with those around us and we point people to say, can I tell you the truth about this Jesus? Now he has stood with me in that fire. When I have been through those pits of hell, when I have experienced death at my doorstep, and yet he was faithful, and yet he was present. And I'm standing here not because I'm good, but because he is. It's that sort of testimony. It's when we build a lighthouse that honors him that people get saved. I heard I was at an event last night, and the pastor said what I think is just really profound. He goes, it's our job to humble ourselves, and then it's God's job to lift us up. Because far too often we get it backwards, and we try to lift ourselves up. which means that God has to humble us. Church, we don't want to build lighthouses to our own image, to our own honor, to our own glory. We build them to guide people to the truth that is Jesus. I want to invite the worship team forward, but church, let me pray for us.